I never imagined my parents would leave me for good. I was just 8 years old when they dropped me off at my grandmother's house, promising they'd be back soon. "We just need some time to sort things out, Lily," Mom had said, avoiding my gaze as she knelt to brush a stray curl from my forehead. "Be good for Grandma, okay?" I nodded, clutching the straps of my little pink backpack, not realizing that I was saying goodbye to them forever. They walked back to the car, and I watched from the porch as they drove away. I stayed outside long after they were gone, staring at the empty road. Grandma Vivian gently called me inside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The days turned into weeks. Every afternoon after school, I sat by Grandma's living room window, watching cars drive past. I convinced myself that one day, one of them would stop, and my parents would jump out, arms open wide, ready to take me home. But they never came. At night, I'd cry into my pillow, muffling the sound so Grandma wouldn't hear. I couldn't stop wondering what I had done to make them leave. Was I not good enough? Was I too much to handle? Grandma Vivian became my rock. She had this way of making everything feel better, even when it seemed like my world was crumbling. "Lily, you're perfect just the way you are," she'd say, her voice soft but firm. She'd sit next to me on my bed, wiping my tears with a tissue she always seemed to have ready. "Some people aren't ready to be parents, and that's not your fault. But I'm here, and I always will be." Vivian wasn't like other grandmothers I knew. She was sharp, wise, and had an air of sophistication that made her stand out. Yet, despite her impeccable style and grace, she lived modestly. Our house was cozy but unassuming. She drove an old, reliable Toyota and still worked as the principal of the local high school, even though she could have retired long ago. I didn't know it at the time, but she was incredibly wealthy. Not that she ever flaunted it. Her true treasures were books, art, and the students she mentored. Under her care, I began to flourish. She nurtured my love for science and hired a tutor when I struggled with math. Every achievement, no matter how small, was celebrated with genuine pride. When I won first place in the state science fair at 13, she threw a party at home, inviting all my friends. I remember the warmth of her hug and the way she beamed at me, saying, "That's my girl. You're going to change the world someday." With her encouragement, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. It was me and Grandma against the world. She never spoke badly about my parents, but she made sure I knew their absence wasn't my fault. "Sometimes people make choices they can't take back," she'd say, her eyes distant, lost in some memory I could never quite reach. "But those choices reflect on them, not on you." Eventually, I stopped waiting for my parents to return. The ache in my chest dulled, and the questions faded. I had Grandma, and she was more than enough. She was my everything. Then came my 18th birthday. Grandma Vivian threw a party at her favorite restaurant, an elegant, intimate affair. She invited my closest friends and even some of her colleagues from the school. That evening, she handed me a small, delicate box. Inside was a gold necklace with a tiny key pendant. "This is more than just jewelry, Lily," she said, her voice full of mystery. "Keep it safe. You'll understand its importance when the time comes." I couldn't have known that night would be our last real celebration together. Just 3 months later, my world shattered again. Grandma collapsed at school. By the time I reached the hospital, she was gone. "A heart attack," they said. "Quick and painless." But for me, the pain was anything but quick. It ripped through me, leaving me hollow and lost. The funeral was beautiful, just as she would have wanted. The church was packed with former students, colleagues, and friends, all of them sharing stories of how she'd changed their lives. I sat alone in the front row, clutching the key necklace around my neck, trying to be strong like she always taught me to be. That's when I saw them. 2 figures I hadn't seen in 10 years. My parents? They walked into the church as if they belonged there, their eyes scanning the room before locking onto me. Mom's hair was streaked with gray, and Dad had a little more weight around his middle, but I'd know their faces anywhere. My heart stopped, then started racing. They made their way toward me, their faces filled with something that resembled concern, though I couldn't be sure. "Lily, sweetheart, Mom said softly, reaching for my hand. I pulled away instinctively, the anger bubbling up before I could stop it. Dad cleared his throat. We came as soon as we heard. We're so sorry about Vivian. I said nothing, my mind racing. What were they doing here? After all this time, why now? Mom pressed on. We know it's been a long time, but we're here now. We want you to come home with us. You're still a minor for a few more months, and we're your legal guardians. It's only right. Their words felt like knives. A decade of silence, and now they wanted to play happy family? I'm not going anywhere with you, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Grandma Vivian was my home. Mom's expression hardened, a glint of the stern woman I remembered from my childhood. Lily, don't be difficult. We're your parents. You don't have a choice in this. A deep voice interrupted from the back of the room. Actually, she does. We all turned to see a tall man in a sharp suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He walked toward us with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. I'm James Fitzgerald, he announced, Vivian Montgomery's attorney, and we need to have a conversation about her will. Mom and Dad's expressions changed instantly. Mom's eyes lit up with thinly veiled interest, while Dad adjusted his tie, suddenly nervous. James nodded toward a private room at the back of the church. Shall we? As I followed them into the room, my hand moved instinctively to the key pendant around my neck. I could feel the weight of everything shifting once again, but I had no idea just how much my life was about to change. The private room felt like it was closing in on me. The walls were too white, the table too polished, and the tension in the air was suffocating. I sat down, trying to keep my hands from shaking as James Fitzgerald, the attorney, started pulling papers from his briefcase. My parents flanked me like hawks, their eyes darting between James and the stack of documents. Before we begin, James said, his voice steady and professional. Lily, may I see your necklace? I reached up, my fingers curling around the key pendant Grandma Vivian had given me on my birthday. It felt cool against my skin, a comforting reminder of her presence. I slipped it off and handed it to him. James examined it briefly, then nodded with satisfaction. Perfect. He placed it carefully on the table. This key is more important than you realize. Mom and Dad looked confused. What does a necklace have to do with any of this? Mom asked, her voice a little too sharp. James didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Let's start with the terms of Vivian Montgomery's will. As soon as he said those words, my parents straightened in their seats. Mom folded her hands neatly in her lap, but her knuckles were white from how hard she was gripping them. Dad crossed his arms, pretending to be calm, but I could see the way his leg bounced under the table. James began reading. The legal jargon washed over me, but I tried to stay focused. I caught bits and pieces, property, assets, accounts, but my mind kept wandering back to my grandmother. I wished she were here. I wished she could tell me what to do, and then one sentence pulled me back to the present. To my beloved granddaughter, Lily Grace Montgomery, I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, bank accounts, and business holdings, currently valued at approximately $47 million. The room exploded. $47 million? Mom shrieked, her face turning bright red. That's impossible. She was a school principal. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This has to be a mistake. We're her children. We're the rightful heirs. James didn't flinch. I assure you, there's no mistake. Vivian Montgomery was a very successful investor. She built a significant portfolio over the years. I sat there, frozen. $47 million. Grandma Vivian had driven a beat-up Toyota and worn the same practical blazers for years. She never once mentioned anything about being wealthy. I had no idea. Mom wasn't letting it go. This will can't be valid, she spat. Lily's still a minor. We're her legal guardians. James's expression hardened. Actually, you're not. The room went silent. What? Dad's voice was low, dangerous. James calmly pulled out another document and slid it across the table. 10 years ago, After you abandoned Lily, Vivian filed for full legal custody. You never responded to the court summons, so custody was granted to her by default. You haven't been her legal guardians for a very long time. The blood drained from Mom's face. That's not possible. It's all right there, James said, tapping the document. I couldn't stop staring at my parents. They looked like strangers to me. Their concern from earlier was gone, replaced by naked greed. They didn't care about me. They cared about the money. Lily, Mom said, her voice suddenly sweet. You don't understand how overwhelming this kind of responsibility can be. Let us help you. We can manage things for you, make sure everything is taken care of. I finally found my voice. You want to help me? I laughed bitterly. Where was that help when I was 8? Where were you for the past 10 years? Mom opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. You didn't care about me then. You don't care about me now. You only care about the money. Dad leaned forward, trying to play the reasonable card. Lily, we made mistakes. We were young. We were struggling. I shook my head. No, you made a choice. You chose to leave. And now you're choosing to come back, but only because you found out about the money. The silence that followed was deafening. James cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Vivian left a letter for you, Lily. She asked that you read it privately. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Grandma's familiar handwriting. My chest tightened. I took the envelope with trembling hands and stood. I need a minute, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the room, clutching the letter like a lifeline. I found a quiet corner in the church and sat down, my heart pounding in my ears. Slowly, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means you've just learned the truth about our family's wealth. I know it's a lot to take in. I kept it from you because I wanted you to grow up understanding the value of hard work and kindness, not money. I watched your parents make choices driven by greed, and I refused to let you be influenced by that. Your parents abandoned you because I refused to keep funding their lifestyle. They chose money over you, but their choice gave me the greatest gift of all, you. The key I gave you isn't just a piece of jewelry. It opens a safety deposit box with documents that will help guide you through what comes next. Everything I've done, I did to protect you and ensure you'd have a bright future. Remember this, Lily. You are loved, not for what you have, but for who you are. You've always been strong, even when life was hard. Don't let your parents manipulate you. You're smarter and stronger than they think. You're a Montgomery woman, and we don't break easily. All my love. Grandma Vivian. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Even in death, Grandma was still protecting me, still guiding me. I clutched the letter to my chest and wiped my tears away. The ache in my heart was still there, but it was mixed with something new, resolve. I knew what I had to do. When I walked back into the private room, my parents were still arguing with James about contesting the will. They fell silent when they saw me. Lily, Mom started, but I held up my hand. I want you to leave, I said firmly. Both of you. Dad's face twisted in anger. Now listen here. James cut in. Shall I call security? As the sole heir and property owner, Lily has the right to have you removed. They stared at me, realization dawning in their eyes. They weren't going to win. They'd lost everything. This isn't over, Mom hissed as they gathered their things. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. Goodbye. I watched them leave, feeling a strange sense of peace. They'd made their choices. Now, I was making mine. And I wasn't looking back. Watching my parents walk out of that church felt surreal. I never thought I'd see them again after all these years, let alone kick them out of my life for good. The little girl inside me, the one who sat by the window waiting for them, was gone. I wasn't waiting anymore. James Fitzgerald gave me a small nod as if to say, "Well done." Then he stood and gathered the papers back into his leather briefcase. What happens now? I asked, clutching the key pendant around my neck. James smiled gently. Now, We visit that safety deposit box your grandmother mentioned. She left very specific instructions about the next steps. I followed him out of the church, catching a glimpse of my parents in the parking lot. They were standing by their car, arguing. Dad's hands were flying in the air while Mom's face was twisted with frustration. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it didn't matter. They had lost. As James and I drove to First National Bank, I sat in silence, staring out the window. My mind was spinning with questions. What did Grandma mean by the door to my future? What was inside that box? "You okay?" James asked, breaking the silence. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "Just a lot to process." "That's understandable," he said. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She thought of everything. She planned for this." That didn't surprise me. Grandma Vivian always had a plan. Whether it was organizing her lesson plans as a principal or making sure dinner was ready at exactly 6 p.m. every night, she never left anything to chance. When we arrived at the bank, James led me inside and spoke with the manager. After a few formalities and signatures, I was taken to a private room where a small metal box awaited me. "Here it is," the bank manager said, gesturing to the box. "Whenever you're ready." I reached for my key necklace. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock. The click of the mechanism felt heavier than it should have, like it was unlocking more than just a box. Inside, I found several neatly arranged documents and a USB drive labeled, "Watch Me First." I glanced at James. "Do you have a laptop?" He nodded, pulling one from his briefcase and setting it on the table. "Go ahead." I inserted the USB drive, and after a moment, Grandma Vivian's face appeared on the screen. "Hi, my darling Lily," she began, her warm smile bringing tears to my eyes. She looked healthy, vibrant. This must have been recorded shortly before she passed. "If you're watching this, it means everything has happened as I expected. Your parents showed up at my funeral, didn't they? Trying to claim what was never theirs to begin with." I gasped. Even from beyond the grave, she knew exactly how things would play out. "You see, Lily," she continued, "there's something you need to know about your parents. They didn't just abandon you. They tried to steal everything from me first." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Your father, my own son, and your mother attempted to transfer all my assets into their names while I was away on a business trip. They thought I was just a naive school principal with a small pension. They never knew I was the one who built Montgomery Investments from the ground up. I glanced at James, who gave me a knowing look. Grandma's expression hardened. When I discovered their scheme, I gave them a choice. Stay and live modestly, learning the value of hard work, or leave. They chose to leave. They left you behind, thinking I would come crawling back to them. They never understood that by abandoning you, they gave up the greatest treasure of all, you. Tears streamed down my face as she spoke. I watched you grow into an extraordinary young woman, kind, intelligent, hardworking, everything they're not. That's why I know you're ready for this responsibility. The video shifted to more practical matters. Grandma detailed the family business, Montgomery Investments, and explained the charitable foundation she had established in my name, the Montgomery Foundation, dedicated to providing scholarships to children from broken homes. "You'll be the new director of the foundation," she said. "Use our wealth to help others like yourself, Lily. That's our true legacy." When the video ended, I sat in silence, trying to absorb everything. "You okay?" James asked gently. I wiped my tears and nodded. "She really thought of everything, didn't she?" "She did," James agreed. "She trusted you to carry on her legacy." I took a deep breath, my fingers tracing the edges of the key pendant. "So, what do I do now?" James leaned back in his chair, smiling. "First, you take some time to process everything. Then, we'll introduce you to the board of directors at Montgomery Investments. They're ready to guide you through the transition. And of course, we'll handle any legal challenges your parents might try to bring up." "Do you think they'll fight the will?" James nodded. "Almost certainly, but your grandmother was thorough. Everything is airtight." A small smile tugged at my lips. Grandma Vivian always had my back. As we left the bank, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief, relief, pride, and a hint of excitement for what lay ahead. I wasn't just some abandoned kid anymore. I was the heir to a legacy, but I wasn't naive. I knew my parents wouldn't give up easily, and I was ready for them. The next few weeks passed in a blur. James helped me sort through the documents from the safety deposit box, introducing me to the intricacies of Montgomery Investments and the foundation Grandma Vivian had created. Every step felt overwhelming, but there was also a strange sense of clarity. It was like Grandma had left me a map, and I just had to follow it. But just as I was starting to find my footing, my parents made their move. It started with letters. Polite, formal requests for a meeting to discuss family matters. James advised me to ignore them. Then came the phone calls. Somehow they got my new number. I stopped answering after the second call, but they left voicemails, their tones shifting from apologetic to demanding. "Lily, it's your mother. We really need to talk. This isn't how family should handle things." "Lily, it's your dad. We're worried about you. You can't trust those lawyers. They're just after the money. Call us back." I deleted every message without listening all the way through. Then, one morning, I walked into the Montgomery Investments office to find them standing in the lobby. The security guard, Ben, who had been with the company for years, intercepted them before they could get far. I saw the way they argued with him, waving their arms and insisting they had every right to be there. They hadn't noticed me yet. "Ben," I called, walking up to the desk. "Everything okay?" My mom's head snapped around, and her face lit up with fake relief. "Lily, thank God." Dad plastered on a sympathetic smile. "We've been trying to reach you." I crossed my arms, keeping my expression neutral. "Why?" "We just want to talk," Mom said, stepping closer. Her eyes darted toward the large glass doors that led to the office suites. "Can we go somewhere private?" I shook my head. "We can talk right here." Mom sighed dramatically. "Look, sweetheart, we know you've been through a lot. Losing your grandmother. It's been hard on all of us." The way she said "all of us" made my stomach turn. Dad jumped in, his voice calm but calculated. "We've been thinking about the future. We know Grandma left you a lot of responsibility, and we want to help. You shouldn't have to handle it all on your own." I stared at them, feeling the anger simmer beneath my skin. "You mean the money? That's what you're really here for?" Dad had the audacity to look offended. "Lily, that's not fair." "Fair?" I scoffed. "You abandoned me. You left me on Grandma's doorstep and never looked back. Now, 10 years later, you're suddenly concerned about me? No. You're here because you found out what Grandma was worth." Mom's face twisted, and for a moment, I saw the mask slip. "You don't understand how complicated things were back then. We were young. We made mistakes." "You made a choice," I interrupted, my voice steady. "You chose to leave, and now you're choosing to come back, not because you care about me, but because you care about the money." Dad stepped forward, lowering his voice like he was trying to sound reasonable. "This isn't just about money, Lily. It's about family. We're your parents. We have rights." "Actually, you don't," a familiar voice said from behind me. James Fitzgerald walked into the lobby, his expression calm but firm. He nodded at Ben, who stood a little taller, ready to step in if things got out of hand. "You both surrendered your parental rights when you abandoned Lily," James continued, addressing my parents like they were unruly children. "Vivian Montgomery was granted full legal custody, and all decisions regarding her estate have been made according to her wishes." Mom's face turned red. "You don't get to decide what's best for our daughter." James didn't even blink. "Neither do you." There was a long, tense silence. My parents exchanged a look, some unspoken conversation passing between them. Then Mom tried again, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Lily, honey, please. We're family. We can work this out." "No," I said, my voice steady. "We can't." Dad's temper flared. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You think you're so grown up, but you have no idea what you're doing. You can't handle this on your own." James raised an eyebrow. "Are you threatening my client?" Dad opened his mouth to respond, but Mom grabbed his arm. "Come on," she said through gritted teeth. "We're leaving." As they turned to go, Dad threw one last parting shot over his shoulder. "This isn't over." I didn't flinch. Ben walked them to the door, and when they were finally gone, I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "You handled that well," James said. "I'm tired of them trying to manipulate me," I said, shaking my head. "They've had their chances." James nodded. "They'll probably try again." "But you're ready for them." Am I? The question echoed in my mind, but I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I squared my shoulders and walked toward the elevator. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, staring at Grandma Vivian's old Toyota parked in the garage. It was strange, really. I could afford any car I wanted now, luxury brands, sleek designs, but I couldn't bring myself to part with that old car. It reminded me of her, of where I came from. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw another message from my mom. "Lily, please, let us explain. You don't know the whole story." I deleted it without replying. I knew enough of the story to know I wasn't letting them back into my life, but as I sat there, turning the key pendant over in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. More truths Grandma hadn't told me yet. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and I was ready to find out what came next. The day after my parents showed up at Montgomery Investments, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that they weren't done with me yet. They had always been opportunists, people who took without asking and left others to pick up the pieces. But this time, I wasn't that little girl waiting by the window. I was in charge now. James arranged for me to meet with the Montgomery Investments Board of Directors, a group of polished professionals, all of whom had worked with Grandma Vivian for years. I walked into the boardroom feeling like a complete imposter. Everyone stood when I entered, their faces warm and welcoming, but I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. "Miss Montgomery," one of the board members, a woman named Cheryl, said as she shook my hand, "We've heard so much about you. Your grandmother spoke of you often." I smiled politely, though I wasn't sure what to say. "Thank you for being here. I'm still trying to wrap my head around, well, all of this." Cheryl smiled knowingly. "That's understandable. Your grandmother built something truly remarkable, and she believed you were the right person to carry it forward." I took my seat at the head of the table, the leather chair creaking slightly as I leaned back. The board members waited patiently as James introduced me and went over the basic agenda for the meeting. They discussed the company's financials, ongoing projects, and potential investments. To be honest, most of it went right over my head. I wasn't a businesswoman. I was a 19-year-old who barely knew how to manage my own bank account, let alone a multi-million-dollar portfolio. But I kept Grandma's words in mind. "You've always been stronger than they think." When the meeting finally ended, James walked me to my car. "You did well," he said, giving me an encouraging nod. "Did I?" I asked with a nervous laugh, because I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. James chuckled. "That's normal. Everyone feels that way at first. But your grandmother trusted you, and so do I. You'll get the hang of it." I glanced at the old Toyota, sitting quietly in the corner of the parking lot. It felt like Grandma was still with me somehow, reminding me to stay grounded. As I opened the car door, James hesitated. "There's one more thing," he said. I froze, my hand on the door handle. "What is it?" James handed me a slim folder. "Your grandmother asked me to give this to you after your first board meeting. She said it would help clarify a few things." Inside the folder was a single sheet of paper, a letter in Grandma's handwriting. "My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, it means you've officially taken your first steps into the world I built. I'm so proud of you. I know it feels overwhelming. The weight of responsibility can be heavy, especially when you've been forced to grow up faster than most, but you've always been wise beyond your years. There's one more thing you need to know. Your parents are more dangerous than you realize. They've always been willing to cross lines for money. But it's not just greed that drives them, it's desperation. When they abandoned you, they thought I would beg them to come back. They thought I'd pay them to stay. But when I refused, they cut ties completely. Now that they've lost everything, they'll do anything to regain control. Be careful, my darling girl. Protect yourself. Trust your instincts. And remember, you are stronger than they'll ever know. With all my love, Grandma Vivian. The words felt like a punch to the gut. I knew my parents were manipulative, but this letter confirmed something I hadn't wanted to admit. They weren't just selfish. They were dangerous. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the folder. "Is everything okay?" James asked, watching me closely. I nodded slowly. "Yeah. I just need to be more careful than I thought." James didn't press for details, but I could tell he understood. "If you need anything, legal advice, security, even just someone to talk to, don't hesitate to reach out." "I will," I promised. As I drove home, my mind kept going back to the letter. I had spent so much time trying to forget about my parents, to move on from the pain they caused. But they weren't going away. They were waiting, watching for any opportunity to worm their way back in. The next day, I received a call from James. "They filed a petition to contest the will," he said. "They're claiming Vivian was mentally unstable when she made her final arrangements." My jaw clenched. "Are they serious?" "I'm afraid so, but don't worry. Your grandmother was thorough. We have everything we need to fight this." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. "How long will it take to resolve?" "A few months, most likely. Maybe longer." "And what happens if they win?" James hesitated. "They won't win. The will is airtight, but if they did, they'd be entitled to a portion of the estate." I shook my head. "No, that's not happening. Like I said, it's unlikely. We'll handle it." After we hung up, I sat on my couch, staring at the key pendant around my neck. It felt heavier now, like it carried not just Grandma's legacy, but also the burden of keeping it safe from the people who would destroy it. I wasn't going to let my parents take what wasn't theirs. Not again. Later that evening, I sat at my desk and drafted a press release on behalf of the Montgomery Foundation. The first round of scholarships had been approved. 20 children from broken homes, just like me, were about to get a chance at a better life. As I hit send, I glanced at Grandma's photo on my desk. "I'll protect what you built," I whispered. "I promise." The following week, my parents made their next move. They showed up at the Montgomery Investments office again, this time with reporters in tow. I was in a meeting when Ben, the security guard, knocked on the door. "Miss Montgomery," he said quietly, "you're going to want to see this." When I walked into the lobby, I saw them, Mom and Dad, standing outside with microphones shoved in their faces, telling their version of the story. "She's our daughter," Mom said, her voice trembling just enough to seem convincing. "We've been trying to reconnect, but she won't speak to us." Dad nodded solemnly. "We made mistakes, but we're family. We just want a chance to make things right." The reporters ate it up. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger bubbling up again. This wasn't about making things right. This was about control. I turned to Ben. "Get them off the property." He nodded and headed outside to deal with the situation. James appeared beside me, his expression calm as ever. "They're trying to pressure you." "I know," I said, "but it's not going to work." As I watched my parents argue with security, I felt a strange sense of peace. They could spin their story however they wanted, but I knew the truth. And I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The chaos outside Montgomery Investments only grew louder as the reporters bombarded my parents with questions. I could hear the murmurs through the glass doors, phrases like abandoned daughter, inheritance battle, and family reconciliation. But I wasn't falling for their act. James stood next to me, calm as ever, but there was a flicker of frustration in his eyes. "They're trying to control the narrative," he said quietly. "They won't win," I replied. My voice was steady, confident, and for the first time, I believed it. Ben came back inside, brushing off his hands. "They're off the property," he said with a satisfied nod. "Thank you," I told him, genuinely grateful. Let me know if they come back. James gave me a sidelong glance. You handled that well. Are you sure you don't want to make a public statement? I shook my head. No, I'm not going to play their game. I wasn't going to let them drag me into a public circus. They could spin whatever story they wanted, but I wasn't about to dignify their lies with a response. A few weeks later, their legal challenge was officially thrown out. James called me with the news. The judge dismissed their petition. The court recognized that Vivian's will was valid, and her mental capacity wasn't in question. Relief washed over me. So it's over? As far as the courts are concerned, yes. But I knew my parents well enough to know that they weren't done scheming. They had lost their chance at the money, but they wouldn't give up trying to worm their way back into my life. Sure enough, a few days later, they showed up at my apartment. I heard the knock at my door and glanced through the peephole. My parents stood there, both wearing carefully curated expressions of concern. Mom had her hands clasped in front of her chest, and Dad was shifting from foot to foot like he was nervous. I took a deep breath before opening the door. Lily, Mom said softly, please, can we talk? I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my expression neutral. What do you want? We just want to make things right, she said, her voice trembling. We know we've made mistakes, but we're still your parents. No, I said flatly. You're not. Dad's jaw clenched. You don't mean that. I do. My voice was steady, unwavering. You left me. You made your choice 10 years ago. You don't get to come back now and pretend like it didn't happen. We were struggling, Mom said, her voice breaking. We didn't know what to do. That's not an excuse, I replied. You had a choice, and you chose yourselves over me. Grandma Vivian raised me. She was my family. You weren't. There was a long silence. We were young, Dad muttered. We didn't realize how much we were giving up. I laughed bitterly. You realized it when you found out about the money, didn't you? That's why you're here. It's always been about the money. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled back. Lily, please, she said. We love you. No, you don't. I met her gaze head on. You love what you lost. You love the idea of control. But you don't love me. If you did, you never would have left me in the first place. Dad's face twisted with anger. You're going to regret this, he said. One day you'll realize that family is all that matters. I shook my head. Family isn't about blood. It's about love. And you showed me a long time ago that I wasn't part of your family. Mom started crying, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. This is goodbye, I said firmly. Don't contact me again. Without waiting for a response, I closed the door. And this time, I didn't look back. Later that evening, I sat in my apartment, turning Grandma's key pendant over in my hands. The weight of everything, the past, the present, the future, felt lighter now. I glanced at my laptop, where a list of scholarship recipients from the Montgomery Foundation filled the screen. 20 kids, 20 lives changed because of Grandma's legacy. I smiled, thinking of how proud she would be. The old Toyota sat in the garage, a quiet reminder of where I came from. I could afford a dozen luxury cars now, but I couldn't bring myself to part with that one. It was a symbol of everything Grandma stood for: humility, hard work, and love. I thought back to her letter, her words echoing in my mind. You're a Montgomery woman, and we don't break easily. She was right. I had been through hell and back, but I hadn't broken. I had learned to stand on my own, and now I was ready to build something new. A few months later, I walked into the Montgomery Foundation's annual gala wearing one of Grandma's old blazers. The board members who had worked with her smiled warmly when they saw it. They understood the significance. As I stood at the podium to give my speech, I glanced at her photo on the wall. Vivian Montgomery believed that true wealth wasn't about money, I began. It was about how you use it to make the world better. She lived by that belief, and today, we carry on her legacy. The audience applauded, but I barely heard them. I was too busy thinking about Grandma. about everything she had taught me. After the gala, I took a quiet moment to myself, standing by the photo. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, "for everything." I touched the key pendant around my neck. It wasn't just a symbol of what she left behind, it was a reminder of who I was. I was Lily Grace Montgomery, and I wasn't afraid of what came next. Story 2. I had no intention of concealing my accomplishments. Being raised in a modest Boston household, early on, I discovered that endurance and humility were more important than rank. While my mother worked back-to-back nights as a nurse, desperate to see me through college, my father, a mechanic, would come home with greasy hands and a tired smile. Emily used to argue that possessions aren't a good indicator of success. It is determined by your identity. I remembered what she said. I opened a tech consultancy business in my garage when I was 23. It developed into M-Tech Solutions 2 years later, currently valued at more than $200 million. However, I kept a low profile because I enjoyed the quiet fulfillment that comes from working in the background. Then I got to know Michael. It was in a local coffee shop that we met. I was preoccupied with going over contracts. When he unintentionally knocked over my coffee, I was wearing my typical trousers and pullover. "Oh no, I'm so sorry." As he struggled to rescue my documents, he shouted. I couldn't contain my laughter. "Everything is all right." Despite the fact that there were acquisition agreements valued at millions, I reassured him. His sincere fear was quite endearing. He urged that I make it up to you. "By the way, my name is Michael." I smiled and replied, "Yes, I'll accept your offer of coffee, Emily." Dinner evolved into a friendship, and that coffee became dinner. I had never met somebody like Michael, a high school teacher who truly liked what he did, kind and grounded. Mostly because he was unaware of my affluence, he never inquired about it. I informed him that I was employed at Tech Solutions as an executive assistant. It wasn't totally false. I was in charge of administrative duties. Not an assistant, but the owner of the business was present. I desired love for myself, not for my possessions. Everything was great until I met Victoria, his mother. The epitome of social aspiration was Victoria Patterson. Her chats focused on fictitious ties to high society, and her home was stocked with fake luxury goods. She disapproved of me as a secretary right away. During our first supper, she inquired, "She is a tone shark. Wasn't there a surgeon's daughter, Michael, my love?" "Mom was introduced to you by me," Michael remarked, obviously irritated, but she persisted. "You should aspire higher, in my opinion, considering our family standing." The Pattersons have always had a happy marriage. I didn't miss the irony. Michael had already revealed the reality of their middle-class existence, which was supported by appearances and credit card debt. "I like my job," I said plainly. "It's rewarding." Victoria gave a contemptuous sniff. "I guess someone needs to do those things." While others got considerate presents, her passive-aggressive comments became a regular part of Christmas family get-togethers. She smirked and continued, "I got a plain office planner for keeping your boss's schedule." Michael never approached her directly, although he frequently apologized in private. I realized how complex family dynamics can be. Then came the news that made all the difference. Victoria barged into the room with a newspaper one Sunday dinner. M-Tech Solutions is seeking a new chief executive officer. This is my opportunity. My drink almost suffocated me. Indeed, we were looking for a CEO. It was a very selective search. "Are you applying?" Michael inquired, clearly taken aback. "Naturally. It's time for me to enter the major leagues after 20 years in middle management." She turned to face me and said, "Would you believe the good word Emily put in for me? However, I don't think your suggestion is really strong." I kept my face expressionless. "Let me see what I can accomplish." She waved and whispered, "Don't bother. I've previously asked for help. My qualifications will impress the board." She had no idea that I was the board. Victoria showed up for her interview at M-Tech Solutions the next week. I was in my private office, dressed in an extravagant suit, when she bragged about her credentials in the lobby. My assistant, Mrs. Patterson, phoned. "You may now access the board." Victoria walked confidently into the meeting room after straightening her stance. When she saw me sitting at the head of the table with board members on either side, she froze. She sputtered, "Emily, why are you here, managing my business?" "Equally," I answered. "Have a seat, please." When she realized this, her face went white. "This isn't possible." One board member affirmed that it is. "Our founder and largest stakeholder is Miss Walker." Victoria's meticulously maintained facade started to fall apart. As I opened her application file, she fell into a chair. "Let's talk about your credentials," I said. My tongue. Everything is business. I questioned every one of the embellishments on her CV. Under investigation, her fictitious accomplishments and purported connections soon came to light. "We're probably done here," I decided. "Your application has been rejected because it contains false information. This is not possible," she sobbed. "It's a personal matter." "No," I said. "It's professional." "However, you mentioned personal issues." "Yes, I have put up with your rudeness and insults for months." "Victoria, this isn't retaliation, it's responsibility." Threatening to expose me to Michael, she hurried out. I was already reaching for my phone when I thought, the head. Michael needed to know the truth. Mom just phoned me in tears. As he entered my office, Michael remarked. His expression was a combination of worry and bewilderment. "You're her boss," she said. "What's going on, Emily?" I gesture for him to take a seat and inhale deeply. "I have a lot to explain, Michael. I wasn't entirely truthful about who I am. Although it's now inevitable, I didn't want to make things more difficult between us. Is there anything I can show you?" Michael was standing at my office's floor-to-ceiling windows a few minutes later. He looked at the nameplate on my desk and the amazing view of the city. The CEO and founder is Emily Walker. He looked at the wall of honors and press stories about my business and technological solutions. He responded in a measured tone. "So you're not a secretary?" "No, I'm not." Standing next to him, I confessed. "When I was 23, I started M-Tech. Your mother made fun of me for working for that firm. I started from scratch while building it." His eyes flashed as he gazed at me, hurt. "Why would you conceal such a thing?" In the meanwhile, I wanted someone to notice me. "My bank account, no," I said. "Are you aware of the number of people who have attempted to approach me due to my wealth or prestige? Not for what I am, but for who I am. I wanted to be loved." Michael's face softened as he breathed. "I recognize that. However, you allowed my mother to mistreat you. This might have been avoided months ago." "And what would have been achieved by that?" I inquired, demonstrating her fixation on status. "Correct. That a person's worth is determined by their level of money." I had no desire to engage in her game. Michael combed his hair with his hand. "You're correct. I ought to have stood up for you. There, I let you down." The office door sprang open before I could reply, and Victoria rushed in, pulling her husband George along with her. She was angry, and her face was crimson. "She's there. The manipulator, the liar." She screamed. "George, always the silent watchdog. Emily, please step forward. This seems out of place. You're rejecting Victoria because of personal differences." By pressing a button, I interrupted him and stated, "I recorded the entire interview." Over the speaker, Victoria's clumsy answers were heard. "It wasn't personal. Your wife exaggerated her qualifications and lied on her application." The board used the information to make its conclusion. Victoria's angry face contorted. "Do you believe you have won? Simply wait for everyone to learn about this. The alleged brilliant CEO who tricked her way into our household by posing as a secretary." "Stop, Mom." The room became silent when Michael's voice thundered. "Simply stop. Can you hear yourself? We're all being humiliated by you. Embarrassing. Here, she is the one lying." Victoria spat out. "No," answered Michael firmly. Emily made a single falsehood. Her occupation. "Regarding everything else, you have lied. Your successes, your relationships, and our family standing. Everything has been a front, and I've stopped making it possible." George put his hand on Victoria's shoulder as her jaw dropped wide. He said, "Victoria, let's go. This has gotten out of hand. It's not over yet." She has since he released her. This is something you'll regret. You too. The office was silent when the door shut behind them. With a tired but determined expression, Michael turned to face me. I apologize for the hardships my family has caused you. But I must know, from here, where do we go? I was about to respond when my helper buzzed in. I apologize for disturbing you, Miss Walker, but Mrs. Patterson is making a big disturbance in the lobby. Security wants to know what to do next. Michael and I looked at each other. He said, "We deal with it together." I stand by, press the intercom, and transfer security footage to my laptop. Only step in when she starts to interfere with operations. We saw Victoria pacing the lobby and interrupting staff members who were venting about me on the screen. The majority rolled their eyes and ignored her, but then she took out her phone. She is robbing customers. Victoria raised the phone in the air and yelled, "Here's my proof. Patterson Insurance financial records." My blood froze. Those are private. How did she obtain them? Michael's face went white. She is employed at Patterson in middle management. The files must be accessible to her. I had Mr. Patterson on the phone already. This is your employee, Emily Walker. In my lobby, Victoria Patterson is threatening to reveal private client data. Indeed. I'll wait. Victoria's voice blared over the feed. I'll ruin her. She's been poaching our best clients. A sharp voice cut through the chaos on the screen. Victoria Patterson, a poised woman in a suit, approached, flanked by two men. I'm Susan Chen, legal counsel for Patterson Insurance. You're hereby suspended pending investigation for violation of your non-disclosure agreement and attempted corporate espionage. Victoria stumbled back. No, you don't understand. We understand perfectly, Susan said coldly. Your access to confidential files has been monitored for weeks. This public outburst only confirms our suspicions. Michael watched in stunned silence as his mother was escorted away, her protests growing fainter. He turned to me. Emily, I didn't know she was capable of this. It's not your fault, I said gently, but we need to address this openly, with your family, with mine, and with ourselves. Michael nodded, his voice steady together, as security led a stunned Victoria out of the building. Michael turned to me, his brow furrowed. He knew about her job performance. I found out during the merger discussions, I admitted. I plan to help her transition into a role better suited to her skills. That's part of why I kept my identity hidden. I needed to fully understand the situation before making decisions that would impact your family. Mr. Patterson, standing nearby, shook his head with a faint smile. Always thinking of others, Emily. It's one of the reasons I agreed to the merger in the first place. He straightened his jacket and added, Don't worry about Victoria. We'll handle the legal aspects with discretion, for Michael's sake. After you left, silence settled in the office. Michael sat across from me, staring out the window. Lost in thought. I need some time, he said at last. This is a lot. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Take all the time you need. At the door he paused, looking back at me. For what it's worth, I fell in love with Emily, the secretary. Knowing you're Emily, the CEO doesn't change that. It just means I have more to learn about you. After he left, I remained at my desk, watching the city lights flicker on as night fell. My phone buzzed, a message from George Michael's father. Victoria is home, devastated. She realizes what she's lost. When you're ready, we should discuss, every one of us. Family shouldn't end like this. The week that followed, I immersed myself in work, giving Michael and his family the space they needed. Meanwhile, the media gained wind of Victoria's public outburst. Corporate espionage between two merging corporations was too sensational to overlook. Fortunately, both firms' PR departments managed to keep the damage under control. One late evening, when I was examining merger agreements, my assistant buzzed in. Miss Walker, the Patterson family is here to see you. They entered together, George, leading with calm authority, Michael, his expression inscrutable, and eventually Victoria, her customary confidence replaced with a nervous, vulnerable air. She donned modest office clothing, a dramatic contrast to her normal luxury style. Emily. George started, his tone measured. We must speak, every one of us. Victoria wrung her hands and moved ahead. I spent the last week in therapy, intense meetings, losing the promotion. I was broken by it. Everything I centered my identity, significance, and relationships around. Everything fell apart. You grabbed for more in an attempt to hang on. Silently, I said. She gave a nod. Her eyes were filled with tears. I told myself I deserved it when I read the CEO posting and that everyone else had been preventing me from knowing the truth about you. What was remained of me was broken. Michael put a kind hand on her shoulder and murmured, "Mom, she needs to hear more from you." Victoria inhaled nervously. For years, I struggled. Addiction to shopping and making up tales about our family's situation. It all began 10 years ago, when George's company encountered difficulties. I made up a fiction, rather than confront reality. Admitting that we weren't who I made us up to be was more difficult. I allowed George to speak, his voice laden with remorse. I believed that maintaining appearances would help us stay afloat, but it did the exact opposite. The combination. Is it still taking place? Yes, I nodded. Both businesses were harmed by Victoria's actions, which did not negate 20 years of service. Long-term workers will get a retirement package as part of the merger. If she wants it, it's hers. After everything I've done, Victoria's eyes widened in shock. I said that everyone should be given another opportunity. However, there are restrictions, ongoing treatment, collaborating with HR to create a transition plan, and, most all, being truthful with both yourself and other people. Victoria collapsed, her well-built barriers finally giving way. I apologize for everything, Emily. For the way I handled you, what I said. Michael grasped my hand and stepped to my side. He said, "We've all learned something. Dad, tell your mother about honesty, about making it possible for me, about defending the moral high ground, and Emily on having faith in those who tell the truth." I completed my forward motion. Victoria discreetly retired after 2 months. She found a new purpose working at a financial literacy program, helping others avoid the mistakes she made at her wedding the following spring, and the merger went well. Few eyes were dry after her passionate address. A year ago, I believed that looks and position were crucial, but my daughter-in-law showed me that genuine value is determined by how you treat other people. We appreciate you giving our family another chance, Emily. It's because you're a kind person, not because you're a CEO. Squeeze my hand beneath the table, Michael. Looking about as our restored family, we had reconstructed our connection on the basis of honesty, eschewing deception and pretense. George discussing business with my father. Victoria assisting my mother with floral arrangements as our staff members socialize with family. I came to see that without others to share it with, success meant nothing. Joyful, Michael muttered. Very, I smiled in response. I do, however, occasionally miss the secretary's desk. He chuckled. You did mention that your assassins were taking maternity leave. Don't entice me. It is. Maybe I'll go incognito once more. Victoria listened and laughed with us. Sincere, without pretension this time. Something considerably more important than rank was discovered by her, at peace with her true self. I recalled that initial unintentional coffee spill as the festivities went on. It had brought about this moment, demonstrating that sometimes the greatest benefits in life appear in the form of chaos. I realized that success wasn't determined by money or titles as I looked around at the people I cared about. Second opportunities were used to measure it. Harsh realities and the guts to be who you truly are. Story 3. I had no intention of concealing my accomplishments. When others think you have nothing to give, life has a strange way of showing them who you really are. I'm Emma Chin, and I've always understood that looks may be deceiving. I witnessed my parents work 14-hour days to put food on the table and give me a chance at success, as I grew up in a small apartment above their little grocery business in Chinatown, San Francisco. I was formed by their lessons. Character and tenacity are more important indicators of true value than material prosperity. My tendu rattles in, Emma, were you able to weigh? As she fixed my collar each morning, my mother would say. Her labor-weary hands were as soft as silk. Every day presents a fresh chance. I helped stock shelves, studied inventory management, and combed through accounting books while my classmates watched TV or played video games. My faithful friend and toy was my father's old calculator, but I took in the spirit of their work in addition to the numbers. No matter how much a consumer can spend, treat them with respect. Be a family to everyone. You never know their story, my father used to remark. Their sacrifices paid off. On the day I received my admission letter, my father closed the store early for the first time in 20 years, and my mother sobbed when I was awarded a full scholarship to Stanford's business school. We feasted on my mother's famous red bean soup and dumplings to celebrate. In between classes, I worked tirelessly at Stanford, applying the fortitude my parents had taught me. I created a novel supply chain management system that attracted the attention of Genesis Tech, a new powerhouse in Silicon Valley. Global distribution could change as a result of your method, their CEO, Marcus Sterling, stated at my last presentation. After you graduate, we would love to have you join us. The deal exceeded my expectations, a high-level role with substantial stock options. Marcus was taken aback when I asked to begin in operations instead. As at my parents' store, I had to learn the business from the ground up. The majority of individuals like to begin at the top, Marcus said. His interest was aroused. I said, I want to earn it. If I don't know the fundamentals, how can I lead? I'm impressed, he said. Few of my co-workers were aware of my actual title, which was Senior Vice President of Operations. I liked a secret. I met James that way. I was absorbed in inventory reports one soggy Tuesday morning in the office cafeteria when someone bumped into my table, almost spilling my coffee. Oh no, I'm so sorry. A tall, good-looking man with a chef tie fumbled to keep the cup steady. I promise that my coordination is typically better. I laughed in response. Nothing was harmed. My name is Emma James. Wilson, James. Something inside of me was pulled by his warm grin. Let me compensate you. I'll pay for the coffee. Lunch followed by supper after one coffee. We were inseparable very quickly. James was a marketing professional, and his artistic ability complemented my analytical disposition. He enjoyed hearing about my operations work. Always interested in my day, one evening as we walked along the bay, he commented, "You don't only notice issues, you see answers." After 6 months, he proposed. Without hesitation, I answered sure. I didn't meet his mother, Victoria Wilson, until we started organizing a wedding. We met for the first time in their house in Pacific Heights, an homage to old money. From the top of a marble staircase, Victoria welcomed me. Her attitude, I say. So she started looking at me via high-end spectacles. Do you work in operations? The word almost came out of her mouth. Yes, I said evenly, without going into any detail. What about your parents? In Chinatown, they run a food shop. We are small business owners, she said, looking at her spouse. All people must begin somewhere. Squeeze my hand, James, but don't say anything. A warning sign that I choose to overlook. Victoria's overt interference and subtle jabs became commonplace in the weeks before our wedding. She insisted on planning everything and disregarded my preferences as beautifully straightforward. She would touch my hand like she was comforting a kid and say, "Darling, let people who are aware of these things do it," even my wedding gown. An argument arose over a contemporary design with traditional Chinese accents. But Francis, wouldn't you rather have something more suitable at the street? I firmly respond, this is appropriate. It respects both cultures. Her lips were pursed. Well, I guess it's up to you. However, Caroline, James's first girlfriend, always possessed such taste. European. You know? James remained silent once again. The wedding was lovely in spite of Victoria's meddling. The front row was occupied by my parents. Their eyes were gleaming with tears. Victoria presided over her bridge group in the meanwhile, entertaining them with stories of James's successful cousins. Not everyone gets married, of course. I heard her say that, her voice brimming with contempt. The stress didn't go away after the wedding. Victoria's insults persisted, and monthly family dinners turned to become endurance tests. Could you assist the housekeeper in clearing the table, Emma? The kitchen must make you feel more comfortable. Or James. Caroline recently become a partner at her legal practice. When people realize their full potential, isn't it inspiring? Victoria stressed that everyone who mattered will be there for the lavish holiday meal she announced by Christmas. Everyone who is important, I repeated. Indeed. Okay, you know what family is. James remained silent as he gazed into his wine glass. Victoria had no idea how her Christmas supper would challenge her preconceptions in unexpected ways. That's a tale for another time, though. At precisely 6 weeks, we reached the Wilson residence. As usual, Victoria had not cut any corners. Through the frosted windows, I had a glimpse of the dining room, which resembled a luxury magazine cover with towering flower arrangements and glistening crystal. The 3-story exterior was decked with thousands of dazzling white lights, and the front entrance was adorned with a huge wreath with a gold bow. Victoria, Emma, and James welcomed us. Her grin was as icy and refined as the cutlery within. She was dressed in a sophisticated designer gown that was definitely more costly than what she thought I would make in a year. James, sweetheart, the living room is where everyone is gathering. Emma, you might be able to help out in the kitchen with the snacks. James started, but I gave him a quick pat on the arm. It's okay, I responded in a composed tone. A smug smile twisted Victoria's lips. Very thoughtful. She's always eager to help out, which is what we adore about her, James. I was left alone in the hallway as James followed her into the living room with a feeble giggle. I discovered Maria, the Wilsons' 15-year maid, leading a tiny staff with the accuracy of a commander in the kitchen. Her eyes lit up with a loving grin as she saw me. What are you doing in here, Mrs. Emma? Are you a visitor? Apparently not, I smiled wryly in response. Nevertheless, I rolled up my sleeves and started assisting her with setting out the canapes of smoked salmon. As more guests arrived, Victoria's ecstatic cries were heard after the doorbell chimed once more. One voice stood out among the others. When it came time for dinner, Maria and I carried the appetizers into the formal dining room, where Caroline, James's ex-girlfriend, had somehow managed to make it onto the guest list. The scene that met my eyes was just as magnificent as I had envisioned. Every seat at the enormous table, which could accommodate 24 people, was marked with name cards in Victoria's flowing calligraphy and adorned with Waterford crystal and antique silver. I circled the table, looking around for my name. It was absent. Emma, I see. Victoria's voice came out, fox-concerned and syrupy. We're a little crowded at the main table. You understand, I'm sure. Family comes first. How about we go into the kitchen with Maria? It looks like you two get along great. There was silence in the room. Everyone looked at me, some uneasy, some interested. Caroline's glass of champagne barely covered her smirk. Richard, James's father, cleared his throat. We might be able to accommodate another chair. Nonsense, Victoria said with ease. Emma is aware that she's accustomed to more relaxed environments. Even though my cheeks were burning, I tried to look neutral. I had learned the importance of maintaining composure from years of managing difficult negotiations. Naturally. Victoria, whatever makes you comfortable. I was about to walk away when I noticed James's eyes. He looked uneasy, but said nothing. Something inside me hardened. Back in the kitchen, Maria wrung her hands. Mrs. Emma, this isn't right. Let me speak to Mrs. Wilson. It's fine, I said, pulling out my phone and sending a quick text. I sat at the small kitchen table and opened my laptop. At least let me fix you a plate, Maria insisted. Thank you, Maria, but I have some urgent work to handle. A major supply chain issue. I offered a reassuring smile as I reviewed the data Marcus had sent. The problems in Asia were more severe than I'd hoped, but not insurmountable. From the dining room came the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Victoria's voice floated above the rest, recounting tales from James's childhood. Caroline chimed in with anecdotes from their high school days. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The doorbell rang again. Maria moved to answer it, but I stopped her. That's for me. I opened the door to find Marcus Sterling, CEO of Genesis Tech, standing in his signature tailored suit, a look of mild concern on his face. Emma. He greeted me warmly. Apologies for intruding on your Christmas dinner, but we need your input on the Asia situation. Of course, I said, gesturing for him to come in. Though technically I'm not at the dinner table. His brow furrowed. Not at the table. Why not? Why don't we find out together? We walked into the dining room where the hum of conversation stopped abruptly. 24 heads swiveled toward us, curiosity and confusion etched on their faces. Victorious too quickly. Her expression hard to read. "I'm so sorry, sir. The help isn't supposed to let visitors in unannounced. Emma, you should know better." Marcus blinked, then turned to me. "Help! I'm confused. Why is my senior vice president of operations eating in the kitchen?" The silence was deafening. Victoria's face drained of color. "Senior vice president." "Indeed," Marcus said, oblivious to or perhaps enjoying the tension. Emma's leadership has been pivotal to Genesis Tech's success. Her supply chain system is groundbreaking. Surely her husband has mentioned her accomplishments. All eyes turned to James, who looked like he might faint. "I didn't know," he stammered. "You never asked," I said quietly. Carolyn's champagne flutes slipped from her hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. No one moved to clean it up. But you work in operations?" Victoria sputtered. "You said I do," I replied, my tone calm. As the senior vice president, I chose to start at the ground level, just as my parents did in their modest grocery store. Marcus nodded approvingly. "Speaking of which, Emma, your mother's dumplings are extraordinary. The board loved them." At our last meeting, Victoria collapsed into her chair, her shock plain. "Board meetings?" "Yes," Marcus continued. "Emma's one of our youngest board members. Her stock options alone are worth." "Marcus," I interjected gently, "perhaps we should handle the Asia situation elsewhere. I wouldn't want to disrupt the family dinner." I turned to Victoria, my gaze steady. "Thank you for making my place in this family so abundantly clear. It's helped me make some important decisions." "Emma, wait," Jane said, finally standing. "We need to talk about this." "We do," I agreed, "but not tonight. Tonight I have a company to run." As I left, I paused. "Oh, and Victoria, those dumplings you dismissed last month, they were a hit at our last gala. $200 per plate. Quite the success with the governor." Marcus and I walked out into the crisp night air as we approached his car. He glanced at me. "I've been wondering how long you've let them treat you like that." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes it's better to let people show you who they really are. And James, that's a decision for another day." As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from James, from Richard, even one from Caroline. But the one from Victoria stood out. "And my dear." "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I turned off my phone. Adrian needed my attention, and my life needed a fresh perspective. As my mother always said, each day is a new opportunity, and tonight I'd seized mine. The next morning, I woke up in my private office at Genesis Tech, the resolution to the Asia crisis neatly tucked away in my outbox. A late-night video conference with our Shanghai partners in decisive action had steered the company away from disaster. As sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Mrs. Chen, Sarah, my assistant, peeked in. "Your husband is in the lobby again. This is his third attempt since dawn." I sighed and glanced at my phone. 47 missed calls, 93 texts, and an avalanche of emails. Victoria alone had sent 28 increasingly frantic messages. "Send him up, Sarah. It's time we talked." When James walked in, he looked nothing like his usual polished self. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, and his tie was nowhere to be seen. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the sleek office, the awards on the walls, and the panoramic view of the bay. "Emma," he began, his voice hesitant. "This is really your office." "For the last 2 years," I answered, motioning for him to seat. "Not that you ever asked." He sank into one of the visitor chairs, his gaze dropping. "I don't comprehend. Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you what?" "That I'm more than the girl your mother looks down on. That I've developed a career while you stood by and said nothing. When precisely was I expected to do that, James? In between your mother's barbs or your silence?" He winced. "Mom's difficult." "Difficult?" I repeated, crossing my arms. "She made me eat in the kitchen on Christmas, and you allowed her. I was about to say anything, but you didn't. You never do." My voice was calm yet forceful. "James, 2 years. You've been laughing at your mother's jokes about my history for the past 2 years. She paraded Caroline in front of me for 2 years, without saying a word. You've been embarrassed of me for 2 years, or at least what you believed me to be. He objected. I wasn't ashamed. You weren't? So why did you inquire about my job at all? How come you didn't come see me here? Why didn't you stand up for me? I heard my phone beep before he could respond. Marcus. The screen displayed his name. Your Asia plan was accepted by the board. The stock is up 12% already, he noted. Fantastic work, thank you, Marcus. Today, I will complete the chronology. James's face was white as he glanced at me when I hung up. Marcus Sterling is your immediate supervisor. For years I have. With a tone, I said, as a matter of fact. Do you recall how I had to work extra last Christmas and missed your mother's party? I was completing a $1 billion deal in Tokyo. But you thought I was at a warehouse working a shift. I had no idea, Emma, he begged. Give me another opportunity, please. I gave a headshake. James, that's the issue. You want to put things right now that you know you were unsuccessful. What about the time you believed me to be merely a girl from the grocery store? Then, didn't I deserve respect? It was deafeningly quiet between us, and I discovered my solution in it. We were stopped by a knock on the door. Sarah reappeared with an uneasy expression. Mrs. Wilson is here, Mrs. Chen. She is adamant. I gave a nod. Victoria's center swooped in, looking as sharp as ever, but without her typical poise. Her gaze darted across the room, enlarging as it saw my qualifications and honors. Emma, sweetheart, she said in a sticky, sweet voice. We must resolve this miscommunication. Miscommunication? I raised an eyebrow. Do you mean the place where you forced me to eat in the kitchen, or where you treated me like a subordinate for 2 years? Her mouth was like a fish out of water, opening and closing. I was unaware of your identity. And that's the crux of the issue, I added scathingly. You make assumptions about me based on my parents' supermarket. How much do you believe Genesis Tech spent on my supply chain system, Victoria? She floundered and blinked. I don't. $300 million prior to my graduation. I learned a lot about hard work and respect from the small shop. Ideas that you still don't understand. Emma James spoke out. Individuals are subject to change. Give us an opportunity to correct this. My lawyer sent me an email when I opened my laptop. 2 years. James has provided you with many opportunities. I looked him in the eye. I'm going to file for divorce. Victoria let out a gasp. You are unable to consider James's future. Mine is, and I am. I agreed to the prenuptial agreement you demanded. It safeguards my possessions just as well as his and the home in Pacific Heights. Last year I purchased it. Examine the property's documentation. James recoiled in disbelief. I was creating something genuine all this time, while you let your mother to disparage me. On my desk, I clicked a button. Please take Mrs. Wilson out, Sarah. James, you need to relocate your belongings to your parents' house by Friday. Emma, consider the opinions of others. When security showed up, Victoria yelled, what I ought to have stated years ago, they'll say. A bank account does not garner respect. Treating people with dignity is how you earn it. I looked across at James. Your mother tried to minimize me for 2 years. She was only able to demonstrate her little size to me. I watched the fog sweep across the bay from the window as they departed. My mother's SMS message showed up on my phone. Deja vu and my 2 handshakes. Every day presents a fresh chance. Grinning, I wrote a press statement regarding the success of the Genesis passage. That day, the stock would close at a record high. However, the stats didn't reflect my actual success. It was in the knowledge that I had recovered my sense of value. I closed another quarterly report 6 months later. The divorce was final. Victoria had a new cautionary tale for her bridge club after the house sold. Now none of it mattered. Sarah knocked. Chen, Mrs. We're having lunch with your folks. Grinning, I closed my laptop. The goal of success is not to disprove others. It's about establishing your correctness and the finest retaliation. In a kitchen, it's not served cold. It's served in a corner office with people who have always recognized your value.